Hi, I'm Dr. Frank Anthony Thomas, and it is another opportunity to present one of the gifted voices that are of the preaching guild in America. We have Charles Edward Goodman Jr. here for an interview. We are live. It's going to be a great time. I'm excited, man. I'm just so glad you decided to come, and thank you so much. We just honor you and honor your preaching, and that you're a significant voice and you've thought a lot about preaching, and so I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you, Dr. Thomas. It's an honor and a privilege to just be amongst so many great proclaimers, women and men who have this great call, who, in your words, are adding to the sacred tradition of African American preaching.
Well, thank you. I think I want to start with your name, Charles Edward Goodman Jr., striking memory of Charles Edward Booth. So I don't know, you all had a relationship. Just say a little bit about it so that we honor him again.
Yeah, rest in power, Dr. Booth. He was a preaching exemplar for me, one of God's best, and someone who admired from afar and was graced to eventually develop a relationship with him. He did my first revival, him and my best friend, Dr. Philip Porter, at Tabernacle when I came in 2007. So to spend that extended time with him then, and then we would just see one another. So it was always funny when he heard my full name, Charles Edward Goodman. He said, "Nephew, you are my namesake." So I carried that, and even when he passed, I was like, well, there's no way I can put on his shoes, but let's see if I can carry the torch. So I wear that with pride. So rest in power, Dr. Booth. He's, I'll be that second Charles Edward, and we'll push on it.
So right off the bat, I get a sense that legacy and preachers who have come before you are important to you. So say a little bit about that, both some who came before you and why they are so important to you.
Yeah, it's interesting. My foray into preaching kind of has an interesting. I was raised United Holy Church, so I was adopted at 14 months by my maternal grandparents. Okay. And it's so interesting. When I think about the first preacher that impacted me was my grandmother, but she was raised in a time where they were not validating women in ministry to that degree. So she got her missionary license. But I would go and look throughout our house, and she would have sermons tucked in Bibles, in books. She used to ghostwrite for the bishops, which is the interesting thing. I need to find some of that stuff and do something with it. And so early on, just this, having her, my grandfather, every night reading, they would play sermons all day. I grew up in a household where I'm gonna hear G.E. Patterson on the TV. I'm gonna hear, it's so crazy, Fred Price or whoever was on TV, whether it's CBN, TBN, I'm gonna hear them. And then going around listening to the preachers that I grew up down the street, Bishop Fields, who was around the corner at Hayes Memorial United Holy Church. But then there was some great local legends like Dr. Curtis Brown at New Light, or Dr. William Wright at New Zion, or Dr. George Brooks at Mount Zion, who are in Greensboro, who may not have the national acclaim, but man, for me as a kid, I would hear them. Every year, Dr. Curtis Brown would bring in Dr. Wesley McLaughlin from Petersburg. So he would take me to the revival. So there was something early on about preaching that I started to listen, and it just resonated with me. One of the most critical things that brought me greater exposure is when I moved to DC. My best friend got,
So bad, I want you to stay there, but this is Greensboro, North Carolina?
Yes, Greensboro, North
Carolina. So that's I'm just trying to set the scene for the audience. They may not know Greensboro, North Carolina. Okay. So, there you were, just set the scene there a little bit. Okay. That's where you were born, raised.
I was raised in Greensboro, North Carolina. So that really was kind of the crucible of my exposure. Okay. But then that was a time before social media, so we were still getting cassette tapes, and so from that, one of the most pivotal things that really broadened my exposure, Dr. Thomas, was when I went with my best friend. He got drafted by the Washington Wizards, and I find myself in Washington, D.C., and I got connected to Pastor Anthony Macklin at Glendale Baptist Church, now it's the Sanctuary. And man, when I went there, because of his national exposure, I began to raid their bookstore. And I was hearing voices that I had never heard before because they weren't on the local TV where I was.
How old were you here?
I was 21, 22 years old. Okay. So then I'm getting to hear a Maurice Watson, a Ralph West, Lance Watson, yourself. I'm hearing, so then once I got it, I started being a connoisseur of all these tapes, and then it became, I just want to hear all these preachers, Bishop Walter Scott Thomas, Dr. Charles Booth, Evie, things that I was getting ready to be exposed to, and it just created this hunger in me, because as much as I was growing up Pentecostal, it was something about the structure of the Baptist sermonic presentation that really appealed to not just my heart, but to my mind. And so I just really began to just study it. And that's what kind of really pushed me that way.
So let me push you on that a little bit. So, and of course, we don't do derogatory, but I want you to compare the Pentecostal homiletic structure and the Baptist homiletical. We're not comparing, saying better than. It's just different.
More passion oriented. I mean, for me, my exposure was, there was a real belief in what you said, but it was more of a kind of a topical expression, if I was to say that. Similar themes. The Baptist to me had a more rigid approach to textual, one text focused preaching. So both of them were very valid. They both kind of really built me spiritually. I think the Pentecostal movement was a lot of different scriptures, whereas the Baptists seem to have this focus on one text, expository, and we're going to unpack this passage as much as possible. And that really just spoke to me, because I think there was more histrionics to it, more background to it. So it was just different. It was just different. And so my aim, and so it's crazy to bring that up, is to kind of marry both. Have the structure from one particular idea, but then bring that passion and that real belief in what you are saying. Not saying that either one does it, but just to try to add them both. So if I was to be, I'm a mutt when it comes to it. I want to be a Bapticostal, and whatever that looks like. Yeah.
Right. So tell me now some about, education, because you have a lot of it. So tell me about that.
I know it's interesting. My educational pursuit started really because I was told when I was a kid that I wasn't smart enough. As many of the stories and many of our black children, they tried to label me and wanted to put me in different classes. And I'll never forget, my grandmother came up to school and said, "That boy is not dumb. He just needs to be challenged more." And they refused to put me in where they wanted to. I'm grateful for my grandparents. And so they made me do extra work. So there's always been this thing for me that I just believed that education was the key. They always instilled in me, get the education. So from there, from growing up in Greensboro, my grandparents had this thing, you couldn't go to school in Greensboro, so I had to go somewhere else. So I was fortunate enough to get a full academic ride to Wake Forest University. I was also able to play basketball there, but what was interesting, what also grew my love for language there is I had the opportunity to be the student ambassador for Dr. Maya Angelou. So that was a wonderful opportunity to sit at her feet, who in her own way as a griot, she's a preacher, she and very spiritual in what she did. So from Wake Forest, it was during my senior year, I had a diagnosis of ALS, and I know we'll probably get to that. That kind of really turned my trajectory, because I assumed I was going to be a lawyer. I was going to preach on the side. I had this call since I was 8 years old, but I didn't see ministry as a profession. I kind of grew up in a way where pastors had a second job. I thought I'd be a lawyer and then preach on the side, and so that was a formative thing. Taking that year off, and then getting an opportunity to one of my mentors, Dr. Brad Braxton, who just came to Wake Forest. My senior year was his first year. And meeting him and expressing what I wanted to do. And he said, I think a great school for you would be Emory Candler School of Theology. That's where he got his PhD. So that begins that odyssey, going to Emory Candler School of Theology. While I'm there after the first year, I get my first pastorate. So I start pastoring during my first sojourn at Emory Candler School of Theology. I know we'll come back and discuss that. And so I finished that, my MD of there, Wesley Theological Seminary at the time.
So tell me, ages, so you're 21,
I graduate from college at 21, take a year off. I start seminary at 22, get my first pastor at 23. By 25, I graduate with my Master's of Divinity from Candler School of Theology. 26, I'm starting my doctoral work at Wesley Theological Seminary under Bill McLean.
So this is D-Min? Or
D-Min, yeah. D-Min, my first doctorate. So D-Min, and they had a thing where they allowed you to erase the 3-year wait. because I was already pastoring. Right. So I get to go there, come back to DC. I love DC. So I'm getting that. I graduated at 29 with my D-Min, and things are just happening so fast. By that time, a couple years after that, I go into Cambridge College to get a Master's of Management, Executive MBA. I do some work at Yale. I do an executive coaching degree at Howard Business School, and then just recently finished a PhD at Anderson University in Anderson, South Carolina, in leadership.
So that's a lot of education.
It's a lot. I'm trying to catch up with you. You had the PhD and the DB. I'm trying to be where you are.
I stretched. I was 57, but I was like, no, I was 48 or something when I got a PhD. You've compacted it. Mm-hmm. So I'm gonna go back a minute. I would imagine that being that close to Maya Angelou, that poetry had to slip into your preaching. Is there a connection there?
It did. You know what's interesting? I kind of grew up in a time too also where social media was changing. The language was beginning to shift. Okay. Because I am also a product of hip hop.
Okay. Tell me about it.
Right. So hip hop is the language that I grew up with. Right. You know, the witty wordplay. So it's not as the long, flowery, why does the caged bird sing? It's more like Jay-Z, Biggie, Tupac in my mind. Yeah. So I'm having to merge these kind of creative nature with what we're putting together. So I would say that it is playing, but it's at a faster pace.
It is.
You know, it's moving. Hip hop has a different cadence. Right. And so I think that becomes entwined in preaching, because I will say, we talked about earlier, some of the older kind of preachers that I was kind of enamored with had the slower cadence. You could tell that generation.
And right? build, you know.
And build, right? It's the runway. Right. But mine is the quick, witty, multi-climatic movement. So I think I'm kind of being formed and shaped in that kind of listening pattern, but also speaking pattern.
See, our interview is unfolding in your style. Our interview is unfolding quickly, you know, so I'm noticing that, you know, when some interviews, old school me and old school preacher, we kind of build, you know, but boom, you come out the boom, we got this piece. And I want to go back and ask you about, okay, so tell me about, what did you do your PhD in? You said leadership. Does that connect it with preaching at all anyway?
It did, yes, because it was leadership in crisis. I really got it done during the COVID pandemic. So part of it was, as a Black preacher, Black pastor, our role is leadership through the pulpit. And so it's not just the conference room. Is what we're saying to people and how we're conveying it. And the truth of the matter is, a lot of our leadership during COVID was through the medium of preaching, because that's all we had. Right. We weren't gathering, we weren't together. So that was really, I have this thing, and this is my own ethic as far as what it means. Preaching grows people, leadership grows churches, right? Like they have to be married. And so I'm always trying to figure out ways in the sermonic moment, in the presentation time, how am I conveying vision? Not only am I also offering hope, but also trajectory and progression, what we're trying to accomplish, what we want to do. So I see them intricately tied. So that was why that leadership piece really, really engaged me.
So talk to me a minute about your pastoral journey. We talked a little about the educational journey. So give me your pastoral journey and the fabulous work you've done in pastoring.
Well, my first church is so interesting. I was at Seminary at Emory County School of Theology, and we had what is called Con Ed, contextual education. So we had to go to the women's state prison in Georgia. Matter of fact, interesting story for me is the only woman on death row at the time, it was my responsibility weekly to go provide communion. So I would go, and then chaplain, bishop, and my advisor at the time, the famed Luke Timothy Johnson, would take us. And so they needed preachers on Sunday evening. No one wanted to go to the prison. But I'm like, man, there's an opportunity to preach. I want to go. And ain't no church like prison church. I mean, for weeks, I was just going and working on the craft. I was just like, that is dope. I get to preach. I went, I'm a young preacher. I didn't know anybody in Atlanta. So it was an opportunity to get to home. Right. So in our Con Ed class was a woman by the name of Annie Boyd. I haven't seen her since. I hope she catches this and sends something. But she said she went to her nephew's church in Alabama, and she did a nutrition conference for him that was held at a church that was vacant. She came to class the next day. She said, Goodman, I don't know. The Lord just told me, I think this would be a good opportunity for you. Here's the number that they told me to one of the deacons, give him a call. Well, it's a country place. So really the number she gave me was the wrong number. It was to his brother. But everybody knows everybody. So I call him, get me in the right place. I'm talking to him, and they give me an opportunity to come down and preach.
Right.
And this place was an hour, 45, 2 hours away from me. I'm in seminary. I ain't got no money. I'm thinking this is an opportunity to go preach. Because the prison, I love preaching there, we weren't getting paid. It was, you had to kind of live. Yeah. So they invite me to come. I'm young, I'm like 22 at the time. And I go down my little white robe, I drove this thing, and it was a church that had been vacant for 2 years. And it might have been 7, 8 people there, but I was just happy to have an opportunity to preach. I drove 2 hours to preach. And they gave me my little honorarium, and then they took me to the biggest restaurant in the area, Cracker Barrel. And they invited me to come back the next month, and then the next month. But at that time, I was really making a plan. My first year seminary at Emory was difficult because I didn't have a lot of finances. They covered all my stuff, but I had to live. It's Atlanta. So I was talking to my pastor at the time, and he was going to let me come do the summer camp for them, and then I was going to transfer to Howard to be on staff with him because I just couldn't live. And so they invited me to come one more time. I said, I just can't go. I gotta, I appreciate it. They were pounding the preacher in the country. So it wasn't like you was getting, I was barely covering gas to go. And it's so funny. I'm getting ready to make the decision in August to go to Howard the next day. It's a Sunday night, go to Howard the next day to do the transfer. And I get a call that night, Sunday night. My pastor preached in Baltimore. At the time, I lived in Virginia, so that's an hour and 20-some minute ride. And it's a 334 number. It's one of the leaders from the church. They called to say, hey, Reverend Goodman, this is so-and-so from Pleasant View Missionary Baptist Church. We want you to know we had a vote yesterday, and we voted you to be our pastor. A, I didn't know I was in the running. And B, it's so funny when I hear the story now, it's crazy. They had 3 other names of people that were pastored before, but there was an old deacon, rest in peace. And he stood up and said, hey, all I know is that little light-skinned fella from Atlanta comes. There's an energy he brings, and maybe it's not what we want, but what God wants for us. And he put my name on the list, and after the vote, I became the pastor of the Pleasant View Missionary Baptist Church at 23 years old, because I just had a birthday. Yeah, so that was my first pastor. So automatically life changed. I didn't go to Howard the next day. Right. I kept going to Emory, and for 3.5 years, God graced me to lead that amazing congregation in the country of Salem, Alabama. I mean, Salem. I have to always remind people, not Selma, Salem. It's Salem. But man, it was great. God graced us in those years to grow exponentially. And I'm just trying out things. I'm just working. I mean, I'm going to seminary during the week, and then they come down, they let me stay, put me up in the Holiday Inn, and I just come and I practice. And I would just work and work and work. And and God grew. People were coming from Montgomery, Birmingham, Atlanta. It was just kind of crazy to do something different in the country. And what's interesting is I was different as a preacher because most of the preachers there were more vocally blessed than me. When I first started preaching, the pastor who licensed or ordained me, Dr. Joseph Parks at Grace Baptist Church in Winston, I used to grow up singing. I used to play keyboard, organ, drums. He forbade me from singing when I started preaching because he said, I want you to be known as a preacher, not just a singing preacher. So when I get to Alabama, you got to understand, it's the country. People got more vocal gifts. I mean, they can yodel. That's what they said, because they be yodeling. I mean, they sing before they preach a little bit, but they go yodel, and they would turn them church. But I didn't have that. So I'm strictly trying to work. Let me explain this to you. Let me do this. And so there in that moment, my style was getting developed. While I'm in seminary, I'm also at seminary at the same time. Here's some of the formative things is my preaching professors at this time, Dr. Teresa Fry Brown. I had a directed study with Dr. Tom Long. Wow. Also had a boot camp with Dr. Fred Craddock. Wow. Oh, yeah. And the one that I did with Dr. Tom Long, he would make me, because we had a whole semester together, bring a videotape of my weekly sermon to him, and we would watch it together every week. You talk about nerve-wracking. At that time, we wasn't no streaming. We just literally had a VHS set up in the church, and they would record it, and I would have to sit there that week, and he would just be sitting there, and we'd just go over it. And I'd be like, man, I don't know how I feel about this, but I was giving my best, getting real-time critique, and really had the desire, Dr. Thomas, to just be better. And so that country just allowed me, that church, amazing people, just allowed me to practice on them week after week. Because I know there are many times they, bless their heart, they got, I mean, it was awful. But Dr. Kenny from Virginia Union gives a story, and it echoed what Dr. Brad Braxton used to tell me. Sometimes you're gonna feed them filet mignon on fine china. Other times you're gonna give them burnt hot dogs on paper plates. Just feed the people. Yes. And that was a freeing thing, because then in the country, no one knew who I was. I'm really just working and working and working. So that's where there. So I was there 3.5 years. And then in 2006, I was at Hampton coming back from Hampton. Good friend of mine, Dr. Terrence Gaddis, who was a classmate of mine at Candler, but also just started passing at McDonough. We're sitting at the gate, getting ready to move from Hampton. I'm getting ready to come home. And guess who strolls up? Dr. Martha Simmons. Mm-hmm. She had missed the flight, so now she was on our flight. And so we sitting there, and she, you know, as Doc always does, she looked at me and said, Goodman, have you thought about Tabernacle Baptist Church in Augusta? I said, Doc, I'm 26, I'm single. I'm 26, I'm single. She said, send me your resume. Because you know, sometimes Doc be getting real spooky on you. Like I'll get random calls even to this day, or text, how are you? I'm praying for you. Just random. So I sent her my resume. And at this time, I'm really just locked in at my church. Mm-hmm. I went to a church, I grew up in a church that never got over 50 people. Church I got licensed and ordained with never got over 50 people. So in my mind, this is church, right? My first foray into mega church was when I was with my pastor, Anthony Macklin in DC, Maryland. I mean, they were up to 3,000, 4,000, 5,000, but I'm like, okay, that's that. So me being in the country, and we grew to almost 300 in the country, I got a good church. They take care. I mean, they done gave me nice little insurance. I mean, they paid me well. I'm fine. Right. Give me a little gas card. You know, I'm living life. I am great. And I sent her my resume. That was the summer of, I was 26, so that was the summer of 2003. No, that was 2006. Sent her that summer, and I got a call from them in July. I don't know what she did to that resume, but it got me enough to get in. And I had an interview in July, and they asked me to come preach in October. There was 3 candidates, whittled us down to 2 after 2 votes. And man, December 31st, I started at Tabernacle Baptist Church as the 10th pastor in the history of this church. And that was 2006 going into 2007. So I've been there the last 16, 17 years, and it has been an incredible journey with some amazing people who, just like I did in Pleasant View, they let me practice every single week. So it's been a great time.
Wow. That's an amazing story from so many different angles. So just now, let's come back to the ALS. Let's go back to it. It was an early diagnosis, so tell me about that. We want to weave that into that.
Yeah, my senior year of college, I was planning to go to law school. I mean, everything had lined up that way. Done the LSAT, all these things. And so that beginning semester, that fall semester of my senior year, I was developing some weakness in my hand. I thought it was carpal tunnel. I'm like, oh, nothing, let me figure it out, go get some tests, whatever. Maybe I'd get some whatever. And man, so I actually went home that summer, that winter, and my sports medicine doctor from my high school, I just went by and he noticed something. He said, you seem like you're favoring your hand. I said, yeah, it's just a little weak. He said, let me send you to this doctor. Let's just get you checked out. And so January that year, after a couple tests and things, I went to a couple doctors. January 22nd, 2001. I'm in my last semester of school. And I'm sitting there with my mom and my grandfather there. The doctor comes in and says, well, we've exhausted all the tests we can. This is, our only conclusion is that you have ALS. And in our opinion.
So tell me, because we have an international audience, a lot of people say.
Yeah, it's called Lou Gehrig's disease. I mean, the longer term for it is, it's a disease that affects your muscles and your nerves. They stop communicating. It starts with weaknesses in your limbs, and then eventually it just takes over your body. Your mind, crazy thing is almost like what makes it so horrific is that your mind is still sharp. You just can't function. And so literally they told me that January 22nd, 2001, in our opinion, you only have 2 years to live. And I am like, what in the world's going on? My grandfather, the strongest man I know. First time I seen him cry, mom crying. I'm like, I'm trying to go to law school. Last semester of school. What in the world? I never forget that night, and what makes that critical, I went home, family, friends were starting to leak out. It's just a time. So I'm from Greensboro, but I went to school in Winston. So Wake Forest is in Winston. And I said, I just can't be here tonight. So I wanted to drive home. I wanted to drive back to school. Just let me get by myself. On the way back to school, it was late. It was like 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. I called my pastor and he said, just meet me in Kernersville at McDonald's. So we get to McDonald's and he looks at me. He said, I don't think God is through with you. I have to really think this is God trying to get your attention. He said, I want you to pray about this. And I was sitting there like, I just heard the most devastating news of my life earlier that day. And now my pastor's saying, I think this is God trying to get your attention. So while I'm driving from Kernersville to Winston, I'm like, hold on, God, there's got to be greater ways to get my attention, better ways than this. Right. But I got in my room that night, Doc, and this is what I said. And literally the thing that gave me peace and really has been the motivation and passion for me ever since. As I said, God, if it's just 2 years, I give you these 2. I give you all I got. Yep. So if this is what it means, if this is what I've been running, okay. I ain't running no more. What I need to do, if it's just 2 years, I give it to you. And from that critical moment of that night till now, I really feel that's the thing that kind of pushes me as passionate, as hard as I go in ministry and preaching and pastoring, is because I'm still living on that promise that night. And so from there, I began to be serious about ministry. I got licensed in April of that year. Stopped going, school's over, law school's out of my mind. Let me try to figure out school stuff. I don't know. I'm gonna give it to you, God. Whatever it is, if I don't make it through, fine. I'm just gonna go hard. And so that's why when people see what I do and how I do it, this is not a calling for me. I really feel like my life is tied to it. From that one promise and pledge I made, I feel like God has kept me way beyond what doctors said as a way to say, all right, it's the fuel for my life. So there is nothing I do even now that does not yet still push, And so people see like, man, you all this education, or as much as you go, it's like, no, I got a promise that I always got to keep. Every day I wake up, I've got to keep this promise that I made to God. Now it's 22 years ago. Yeah.
So how are you managing now with it? How it's been?
It's interesting. And I'm gonna tell you how God sovereignly sets things up. Because at the time, unbeknownst to me, the #1 ALS doctor in the world was at Wake Forest. And because of my connection with our president, Dr. Angelo, what should have been a 2-year wait, they were able to get me in to see him in 2 weeks. They had experimental drugs, but if anybody knows anything about ALS, it is not supposed to be curable. But where I found myself is they gave me experimental medicine, but after a while, God just kind of ceased it. So it's only really now confined to one part of my body, typically it's supposed to spread. But as now it's just, unless you know, you don't know. I've kind of learned how to navigate it. It really affects my right side a lot more. And so I just had to make some adjustments. But that's why my regimen of diet, in the gym all the time, I really try to do things to make sure that I keep myself as healthy as possible. But I believe God healed me, and I believe that I'm living that miraculous part that God has kind of did in my life as a response to that call.
I think this is a profound moment in the interview, and I thank you for being willing to discuss it, because I don't think that the church knows what to do with chronic illness. I think we're trying to heal it quickly. And some of these things we have to learn to live. So I have a phrase, you can't steal this, but the phrase, and I'm trying to work it into something, but I learned it when my dad died. God, I know that you're a healer. I just want to be able to accept whatever form the healing comes.
Absolutely.
It may not come. See, I think we got one form. In the church. Total deliverance. We're gonna anoint you with oil. We're gonna get the elders. We're gonna pray, and you're not gonna have this thing. But for a lot of folks, it's like the healing comes by the ability. It's almost, and I'm gonna go back to you because it's not really about me. there's a difference between a cure. We're looking for a cure. A difference between a cure and a healing.
Yeah. I didn't get the strength back in my hand. I just got sustained, right? Like I don't have it back. I still have trouble with dexterity on my right side. I try to hide it. Even now I was just talking to staff. I've had the last few weeks or so, I've been really having a thing about holding the mic. It's been a struggle. I didn't get my strength back. I just got sustained. But then on the other side, the most important person in the world to me, my grandfather, gets sick with cancer and he dies in 2008. So here I'm on one side where I'm experiencing the sustaining, miraculous power of God, that I'm still here. And then on the other side, the most important person to me in my life gets healed on the other side. And I wrestle with that dichotomy. And I still to this day, where I'm trying to preach hope, and there's times where, yes, I've seen God do it for me, but I also got to acknowledge that there have been moments where it hadn't worked out how I wanted it. Right. And that's a tension that I have to continue to chisel through in my own theology, chisel through in my own presentation of things, because even in this, when my grandfather died, it changed how I approach funerals and preaching at funerals. Right? Because it's a whole different ball game when you're the one on the front row. That's right. And what I say in those moments to comfort people and still tell them that God is good, even when it doesn't work out how we want it to work out, And that's things that I still to this day have to really grapple with. And that hard portion of God, it's tough.
It is. It's tough. It's the real struggle, that many people have. That many people. And I go back again with my father's death. The only way I resolved it, and in my own, I'm older, and you get health challenges. You get older. It's God. I'm available to any form. You are a healer, yes. And I don't want to be stuck on what I think the form of the healing's going to be. So we're able to take these things and turn them into victories because, I don't need to be cured. I just want to be healed. And healing seems to be, I'm able to work this into the flow of my life and still get done what I need to get done. I have to issues to manage. But, back to you. So thank you for that, because that's a profound message I think that people need to hear. And I always think about, I would like to see you write something about chronic illness in the Black church, because
it's not much out there.
Yeah, we got one thing. We anoint you with oil.
That's it.
And then, so let's go back to preaching. So how do you prepare a sermon?
That is such a deep thought. First of all, I have not written a sermon. So I wish I could write a manuscript. Part of my challenge at the ALS, it hindered my dexterity in my right side. Okay. So from my senior year of college to even now, it was a struggle to write, to type. So I had to learn to lean in on a gift God gave me a long time ago, but I never knew how profound it was. I have photographic memory. So for me, I literally I've never written a full sermon. I have the thoughts and the placements of them in my mind. That's been honed through the years, right? I think I always tell people the way to get better at preaching is preaching. So it developed because early on, I'm still trying to figure out what it looks like. When I first started preaching, initially I'm licensed at 21, ordained at 22. By 23, I'm already pastoring. So really, honestly, my formalized portion of preaching was in a short time. And now I got to prepare every week. And I got seminary that they want their papers. Right. So I'm having to figure out how to develop this thing. So it's morphed, whether it was my initial idea of the text, creating a little outline, but I've always been a student of scripture. Historical criticism. When you're exposed to things, you begin to intertwine it. So for me, the question has been that moment has moved. It has grown. So if you'd asked me then, it was just trying to figure out how to get a good word every week. Now, I do a lot of my preaching within the context of series, which helps me to get some things prepared before. So for me, sermon prep, actually, beyond the larger macro, happens every Sunday night. Because once that sermon is preached, Sundays keep on coming. That's right. So it begins in just at least that formulation of my thoughts. So there's certain things because of who I've been interacting with throughout the years, from Dr. Bill Curtis really challenged me about tension. What's the tension of a text? Or Dr. John Guns, who really challenged me on raising relevant questions, right? Or even Dr. Freddie Haynes and Dr. Johnson out of Indy, who really challenged me on illustrations.
Jeffrey Johnson.
Yes. And structure-wise, Dr. Maurice Watson and Pastor Arthur Jackson. Or even just the language of Dr. Gina Stewart. So everyone that I'm kind of growing with, every time I'm going, I'm adding a piece of their mind and what I'm engaged with. So for me, it's really finding the text, beginning with that initial thought. What is this text saying? And I have a structure that I have in my mind, whether it's the opening statement, whether it's the exegetical thought, which is the simple theme of this passage. What's the tension? When I say tension, what the theme of the passage versus where it is intense tension with our contemporary life. Then what's the central theme, relevant question, and from there I try to build my principles. Early on, I used to force alliteration. I think all young preachers, we just hear the rhyming of sermons. And so that's something easy and it's portable because remember, I'm not writing anything down. So I need something that I can quickly get. Even now, I'm not as drawn to that, but I am drawn to knowing the principles on my roadmap. Right. Whatever is built from that text answers that relevant question is the way I kind of flow with it. But I've always had to hone that. And once again, that's looking at close to 20 some years of developing this extemporaneous, non-manuscript kind of outline procedure that I do. And that's why I always love the iPhone, because it has the Notes app. I'm always putting stuff in. There's stuff I'm writing that, oh man, this thought came to me, this goes here. Or I have an illustration note that whenever I get an illustration, just put it in there. And it's gonna be, at some point I'm gonna utilize it. At some point I'm gonna do something. So it's always building. It's always building. It's always building. It's interesting, especially in this compelling preaching initiative, you've been really challenging us to think through some things. And two of the options I thought about was either writing on PG's playbook about how I plan preaching, or PG's cookbook, how I do my preaching. Because to me, I view it as a gumbo.
PG?
Yeah, PG. Well, Pastor Goodman, that's what people call me. So this gumbo of my style that I grew up with. I hear my grandmother. I hear all these people that I bring to the desk with me that is really in my ear, in my spirit, that's also helping me to craft, to also sharpen my own voice.
So how has hip hop influenced either your sermon preparation, your delivery, and that's in the gumbo as well?
Yeah.
So
flow, steady tension, adding contemporary colloquialisms that people can resonate with, being witty, being spur of the moment. I think it's almost that piece of what they would call in hip hop the cipher, right? Because even though now we're at our church, I do multiple services every Sunday, which is like 4 now, we're getting ready to go back to our 5th. But every sermon is different because I'm not writing them. So the way I approach them, how I preached it at my early service is not how I preached it at my last one. It's been honed. I done preached it. I know what works. I know what doesn't work. Also, I got lesser time. I got more time or lesser time. So I got to know how I flow with it. So for me, it helps me to just kind of get the vibe. And also for me, preaching is always, and this is what I'm so grateful for. Now we got people back in the room because it was never meant to be a monologue. It was always a dialogue. And so just like with hip hop, you feel in the crowd. Are they getting this? Are they not getting this? What else I need to say? Let me come another way. Even stuff that you're not even planning, that's the spirit in the moment that is able to drop you things. Because once again, I'm not offering to God an empty vessel. I read widely, I study, which means that even stuff that I didn't prepare to say, I'm prepared to say. Because in that moment, you just never know what comes out.
And there's an element of oral composition too. There's in all these strands you're talking about we create in the moment, and I don't mean unprepared. I think it's very clear you're prepared. I mean, so there's an element of just oral composition. I think an element of jazz, if we would think in that way. Now, tell me a time that you thought and felt and believed that God really used you in your preaching. What would be a time that it just was everything you'd ever thought it would be, and you knew it was God? So tell me.
Wow, that's a great question. Well, it definitely wasn't because the sermon was great. You know, I will admit and acknowledge that some of my most effective sermons was when I thought I was really awful. Right. And I was like, what is happening? No one's saying anything. Right. And I really went through a crisis, they're not hearing anything. But it's only until afterwards that people come up to you and say, man, that sermon really blessed me. Right. And you're like, what? And I know in my mind, I was bad.
Right. What you left out.
I was bad. Right. And that's also reiterated to me the power of the Holy Spirit in preaching. Because I've had moments, Doc, where people come up to me and said something I said blessed them in the moment. And I know I didn't say it. Which also affirms to me that preaching, just like communication, is not just what you say, it's what they hear. Right. So that is what I'm astounded with. Right. Is those stories of not when everybody runs, jumps, and shouts. I mean, as a preacher, we like that. That the black experience in the church moment is just crazy, right? You want them to shout, "You killed the house, Doc." Right. But man, it's those moments when there is not a chirp in that room, and I'm trying because I'm gonna give God my best. I'm gonna prepare. Right. Sometimes it just doesn't go the way you picture it, but then afterwards, man, people are like, that really blessed me. Or I had to make a decision, and you helped me. Or a few months ago, somebody came and said, man, I was battling with this and I really thought that my life was ending, and I heard this sermon you preached. Or even now, stuff that people go back to hear. Thank God for technology. Somebody recently sent me something from a sermon I preached in 2011 that somehow just showed up in this thing. And they said, listen, I heard that today. And it did something for me. And I was like, God, that's just the timeless nature of it. Because we never know when we put it out. We're thinking it's real time. We're assuming that this is it, this is the only time it. And now people are engaging it at different moments of their experience in their life. And that to me is one of it. So I'm still waiting for that one, where, the lights and the sky gets open. But if not, it's the moments when people will come up and say, listen, that really changed me, helped my mind.
Let's go to the other side of the house. Give me a time when it was the most difficult to preach. That family situation, personal, church. When was it a time that was the most difficult for you to preach?
Last year I preached a series in May on grief. And that was the hardest series I probably ever preached in my life.
Tell me about it.
Because it made me look at my own ways that I have not dealt with my own grief. When my grandfather died in 2008. My grandfather died in 2008. I got the word, I was in Phoenix. Flew back early. My grandmother was not gonna do anything with the body until I got there. Right. So I had to be there to make sure it was cool. We ended up doing a funeral on Saturday. I don't have many regrets, Doc, I really don't in my life, but this is one. I did his funeral on Saturday, and I came back and preached at my church on Sunday. And I thought Pastor Goodman was fine, but what I did not take into account is the heaviness of little Charlie, who was the grandson, who was the baby boy that didn't get to grieve. And because Pastor Goodman is a grinder, I'm fine. Life is good. God is able. He'll sustain you. And it took almost those 14 years to realize I wasn't healed. And so now I'm doing a series on grief. And because we're focused on May as our family mental health month at our church, and that I could not, I'm telling you, I don't think I made it through any of those sermons without crying. Even now, my soul, I feel the heaviness of it. So that was the hardest thing because I didn't want to be that vulnerable. As preachers, I know we say it. I know we go out there, we transparent, but that is hard because we're God's ambassadors. We do this. God's with us. We be with God. Most people think we just hang out with God all week. They just show up on Sunday. But man, it is hard. It was the hardest thing, being that vulnerable and acknowledging in that season. And I had to make this declaration to my congregation. I apologize to them because I was a poor example to y'all. You saw me working, and I thought that I needed to work to show you that you can push your way through everything. And I was wrong. I shouldn't have did that for you. And so now I want to apologize and share in this moment that it's okay to cry. It's okay to pause. It's okay to have a bad day. And that was the real practical moments in those preaching, like, it's okay. You know, weeping may endure for a night. We don't know how long the night is going to be.
That's right.
Night is not just a 12-hour span. Night could be a month, 2 years, but what I am sure of is joy is going to meet you on the other side of that night. And we're going to get there eventually. And so I think that to me was the moment.
So what would you now and your older self tell your younger self? I think you just told me, but just, or you know, you also are telling younger preachers, you know, so what would your older self tell to say about that to your younger self?
I would tell my younger self, you don't have to win everything today. It's okay that there's some stuff that you don't get done today. I also tell my younger self, and even young preachers that I have an opportunity to mentor now, enjoy seasons of being anonymous. I didn't know it at the time because I was really just grinding, but I miss those seasons of being in that country. Nobody knows your names. I could go to church at revivals and not be asked to come to the pulpit, just sit in the back and get fed. I wish I would have took more advantage of those seasons, because then I could really continue to just have time for me. I also would tell my younger self, don't just read the Bible to go get a sermon. That I think that is so crucial, and this is something, Doc, that I'm really trying to embrace and lean into now, that I think in order for us to be better preachers, we need to be better disciples. And what has been more formative in my preaching is the fact that when I go to that Bible, when I read, I'm not just looking for a sermon. I'm really trying to grow. And it has made me a better preacher because I really want to be a better disciple. And I would tell them, I think that is so critical. Don't be in performance mode all the time. You know, just give your best and let God do the rest. And so, you know, that's most of the things I try to impart. And if I was to tell Lil Goodman, yeah, man, it's okay. This journey, I know you at this moment, I know, Lil Goodman, you thinking time is coming on you fast. And I know, because that was my approach. That's why I think God did such a fast thing, because I really lived life like I only had 2 years. And I would love to tell Goodman, it's okay, you're going to make it. Yeah. Maybe some things that I forsake, whether it was relationships, whether it was this, whether it was that, it's okay. You're going to make it. Right. Yeah, so that's what I probably would tell myself.
So how would you name your preaching style? We've been kind of talking, if you had to name it.
Wow, that is so incredible. You know, y'all challenged us last time we gathered how we view God. Yeah, in Compelling Preaching Initiative. To how we view God. And man, when that finally dawned on me that out of everything I view God as loving, that began to really put things in perspective. And as I heard the rest of the people who I'm so enamored with in our group share their thoughts, none of us had the same thing. And I was like, that is so interesting and dope, and like at the same time. So it got me thinking that if I was to kind of form it, I would say I'm more of a narrative, life situational expositor. What does that mean? Now I'm just coming up with my own terms.
Right, which is what we like.
Yes,
go ahead.
The narrative is God's story.
Right.
And how it intersects with your story, life situation, your story and your situation,
right,
through the lens of a text or scripture. If I was to put me, that's me. I'm a narrative, life situational expositor. So it's always going to be here with God's story and how it invades in our own story through our situations, and how that then can be examined through a particular text in a particular context. Right. So that's where I'm at right now. Now, if you would ask me this question next year, it may change. But that's where I've been really thinking, because I really have been trying to figure out, how do I do what I do? And why does it resonate?
So then the method to get there is, you had an order, remember? Relevant question was way down.
Yes, sir.
So go back over that order for me, because that's the method to get to.
Yeah. That exegetical thought, and it's just in my mind, tension, central theme, relevant question, principles.
Right. And I push that because one of the weaknesses in the African American community is method. And we hear great preaching, we love great preaching, and a lot of us do great preaching, but we can't name our method.
Okay.
Right? So which means that for all the people who love your preaching and all the people who are imitating your preaching, if they don't have a sense of your method,
That's true.
then they sound like you, or they dress like you, or they clothes like you, or have no idea of what you're doing.
Yeah.
So part of why we do this series is to help people from the method side by take great preachers and talk about method. And also to push on you all to articulate, because my argument is a preacher needs to leave a recipe so that the next generation can look at it, can take it, and can change it or adjust it to their own thing. But they've got a recipe. It's like, if grandmama make biscuits like nobody on earth, and grandmama don't leave a recipe, then everybody is trying to figure it out. And so some of my contribution is to ask method questions. So, and it's part of the compelling preaching initiative. So I'd love to see you flesh that out.
Yeah.
You've got the bones of it. Just kind of flesh it out, and you leave something behind at a whole nother level.
Yeah.
And as young preachers, they want to know, how do you do what you do? And you can tell them. This is narrative, life situation, expository. This is how I prepared a sermon. This is where I start with. These are the questions, and it helps them. Because I really think without method, preaching is weak, or with method, it cuts sermon preparation down.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're not scrambling every week. When you don't have method, or at least clear method, your sermons do this. You're good one week and you're down, but it adds a consistency and a trajectory when you can start to name this stuff, which is why so many wonderful preachers will take our PhD program, our compelling preaching initiative, and we push them on method, and they go to another level. Yeah. Because you get intentional. Once you name it, you get intentional. I know this is far upfield, so we're talking about you about.
No, but it's good. I think, and to those who are viewing, I agree. That's one thing that's challenging me, because I had to finally realize people are watching what I do. Sometimes you can be so in it that you don't think about it, because you're just so. I'm just trying to get better every week. I mean, it's really, even now to this day, I'm still evaluating, what I did this past weekend, and I got another weekend to get it together. So I'm still at the place where, man, I'm just trying to get better every week. And so it is astounding that people want to hear you, number one, and then number two, emulate what you do.
Exactly.
And that's still mind blowing, but that's the process. Yeah, that's the process. That's the process.
Well, I think you're coming along, nicely in it. I think that you'll be able to maybe teach preaching one day. I don't know, if that. I did not know that I would ever be teaching preaching. Henry Mitchell called it out of me. I was just a pastor trying to get better on a weekly basis. That's all I was trying to do, and he just yanked it out of me. You can do this, and so it has opened up into all of this stuff. Wow. So I think that you have these gifts. You will have many doors upon which to choose how God can best use you. And I hope that, given the level of craft, attention you've given to preaching, and given the years of experience, which is part of what we're trying to do in the compelling, trying to help you focus down into a writing contribution, leaving something in writing, or even if, and then we talked about working through some of the ways by which you can dictate it, or you present the lecture, and then you get the transcription of the lesson, and you edit the transcription. You can do that audibly. Once you get an artifact in sound, you can come back and do whatever you want. Come back. There are many ways. So I just, I'm thankful, for the time with you, that you've been open and vulnerable, and I think that you're offering an authentic masculinity in terms of that sharing power, vulnerability. These are the things that make for me I was reading a woman named Susan Faldy, and she says, men, I'm paraphrasing her, men don't need to learn how to be masculine, they need to learn how to be human, and the masculinity will take care of itself,
That's good.
So thank you for modeling to my audience. Thank you for what you bring. It's a lot of food for thought here. I can't wait to see what the discussion around this, becomes. And to just bless you and encourage you and thank you and just keep doing it, man. It's a privilege for us to have you. And I just can't wait to see what God finishes with you in terms of, that it takes time to build a life, and don't necessarily mean to testify, but I'm in some places I had no idea I'd ever be. I never dreamed a PhD program until the intersection of pastoring and the academic life. A PhD hit 31 years of pastoring, boom, and this thing, and so let me stop. I like to focus on the people, not focus on me. Anything that you want to say or ask that I didn't ask, or anything that's in you that you would like? We have a national audience, international audience. People watch these things. It's amazing to me how much they watch them. Anything you want to say that I didn't think to ask, or anything, just whatever you like to say.
It's just amazing to be a part of this amazing tradition of African American preaching. And to just be as faithful and steward well this portion of it. Just like I've gleaned from so many before me, it does up the ante that I owe it to those coming behind me. Because there's some brilliant women and men that are just grabbing that plow firmly and plowing that gospel plow. So I think it's incredible. I think we owe it to those before us to pay it forward. And I can't wait to see what it looks like. I still believe revival's hitting the church, and I still believe that a lot of it will happen through the gifted women and men of our African American preaching tradition, because, man, there's nothing like it. Nothing like it.
The beauty, the depth, the power, the imagination, the creativity of the African American preaching tradition can generate a preaching renaissance to revive American Christianity in the 21st century. That's the mantra for so much of my work that motivates me, because it's a great tradition. It's a great, and I had the blessed opportunity to work with Martha Simmons on that anthology of African American preaching, and it took us 10 years to pull that thing together. And one of the, if not the chief lesson out of all of that was how great this tradition is. That we're walking in a stream. And a lot of preachers, I fear, are unaware of the stream. But to get in the stream and to look both back and then to look ahead, which begins to be a mentoring role, which begins to, what are you leaving? What's your method? How are you training people? How are you helping preachers to get better? How, that's the question. How do you, given all that God has blessed you with, help preachers to get better? So
I would like to say, to validate those who, wherever you're watching, your voice is necessary. Your voice, like, there's not one preacher. God didn't call just one preacher, so your voice is necessary. And that has been the most assuring thing for me, is to get the validation from you, Dr. Thomas, and others who in my own way that are still evolving, still becoming what it's going to become, right? I'm not at the pinnacle of being a preacher God wants me to, that I feel like God wants me to be. But to just know that at every season, every stage, where I was at that moment was good. As my voice was evolving, you know, so I want to encourage everyone, your voice is necessary, and just keep working, keep grinding.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you, man. Thank you so much. This is going to help a whole lot of people. So thank you.